The King of the Golden City by Mother Mary Loyola, read by Alex Harb. The King of the Golden City. The Meeting in the Woods. There was once a king who lived in a land where the most lovely flowers bloomed always. His palace of ivory stood in the midst of a city through which flowed a river clear as crystal. The streets of the city were of pure gold, and the gates were a single pearl each. There was no death, nor pain, nor mourning, nor crying within those gates, but songs of joy resounded on every side. Very different from this land was another, which also belonged to the king. It was a country of travelers. Its people were journeying to the Golden City, and there were many troubles on the way. The king loved the poor exiles. He tried to keep them safe from harm and to make them happy as far as he could. But to make them quite happy, without any danger or pain, this he could not do. First, because the country through which they were passing was not meant to be their home. And next, because of a certain rebel lord named Malignus, who lived there. He had once been a servant of the king, but he had turned against him, and for the hate he bore him, he tried to harm the poor people whom the king loved. The home of the exiles was the beautiful land where the king himself lived, with all the happy ones who had spent their time of exile well and had loved and served their king. Now it chanced that as the king was wandering one day in a dark wood of the land of exile, he came upon a little maid of 8 or 9. She was very poor, and her clothes, though tidy, were threadbare. She lived in a hut hard by. Whether it was the king's fancy and nothing more, certain it is that he was drawn to this little maid. He had no sooner seen her than he loved her and longed to make her happy, and this at any cost to himself. He spoke kindly to her, took the heavy bundle of faggots off her shoulders, made her sit down by his side of the trunk of a fallen tree, and tell him about herself and her troubles. When it was time for her to go, he arranged her load so that it was easy for her to carry. And when she turned her head for a last look at him, he was still following her with his kind eyes, as if he was sorry to part with her. After this, he would often come to her in the wood, and each time she came to know him better and to love him more. He told her that if she liked, he would take her to his own beautiful land, where she would be with him always and have everything her heart desired. It could not be at once, because she must be trained to be a fit companion for the princes and princesses of the Golden City. But to comfort her till the happy time came, he would often come to see her, and would teach her himself what she would have to learn. In the city, everyone was like him. She would have to become like him before she could live amongst them. He would teach her in his visits, and would bring the rich presents that she might not be ashamed to be presented at his court. One day he gave her a great surprise. He said he was coming to meet her not in the wood, but in her own little hut, that he might see for himself all she wanted and give her whatever was good for her to have. He spoke so kindly and looked at her so lovingly that she was sure he meant all he said. Yet she could not help saying, "How is it, O great king, that with so many grand folks and faithful friends about you, you should care to come to a poor little maid like me?" And he said, "I loved you long before you ever heard of me. And if you will love me in return, I shall think myself repaid for all I have done for you and am going to do. You have nothing costly to give me, but there are wild flowers you can offer me. Bring them into your hut, and they will please me." She was delighted and prepared her little place carefully for his coming. The floor was only mud, but she swept it clean. She made the one tiny window clear and bright, and drew within a trailing rose that its fragrance might refresh the king. And then she went and hunted diligently for the wild flowers that he loved, the humble violet, the roses with their thorny stems, and above all, the sweet forget-me-nots. She came home with her apron full. She was tired, for it had cost her something to get her treasures. But she did not mind the trouble if only she could please the king and make him some returns for the long journey that he would have to take to come to her. She had heard that the treasures he was bringing her had not cost him nothing. Nay, that he had had to work hard and go through dreadful pain to purchase them. Could she ever do enough for him? He came not in all his majesty as he was known in the Golden City, that would only have frightened her, but in a simple robe of white, so disguised that some foolish people who knew how great was the king of the Golden City mocked and said that this meek and lowly stranger could not be he. He came, and you should have seen his smile when he saw the little hut. There was a path through the wood to it all strewn with flowers. At the door, the little maid was waiting for him with outstretched arms. And she brought him into the hut, and the door was shut. I cannot tell you what passed between them during the quarter of an hour he was within. That is their secret. But when the king came out, the maid's beaming face told what a happy time they had had together. The white robe she had taken care to put on was all sparkling with jewels. His gifts to her, no doubt. Anyone quite near the door would have heard her say, "Lord, come again soon." She watched him go down the flowery path until it turned and he was out of sight. Then he went in and shut the door, and had anyone been by, he would have heard her singing for days after, as she went about her work. "Come, dearest king, again to me. How much I long for thee." And he came again and again. Each time the flowery path was ready. Each time the rose trailed through the open pane. Each time the forget-me-nots lay about his feet as he and the little maid sat together, hand in hand. The fifth time, or was it the sixth, he noticed that the happy path to the hut was shorter and the flowers less fresh than usual. Perhaps the little maid was tiring of a preparation that must cost something. Anyhow, the king's quick eye noted the change, and a sigh escaped. Next time he missed the flowers within the hut. He did not complain, but his smile was a little sad. After that, his welcome grew less hearty each time he came. He did not get the invitations that were once so pressing, and on the days of his visit, the little maid did not fill the place with her song. There was scarcely any preparation for him now. When he came, the hut was not dirty, of course, but dusty and uncared for, and he looked in vain for the flowers. He did not change. He brought his rich gifts as usual, but there was no fit spot to lay them down. So he took them away with him and kept them for the little maid in hopes of better times. And the old times did return. The king came one day as usual, down no flowery pathway now. She was not standing in the doorway, but amusing herself within. He had to stoop as he went in, for above and around the cobwebs were clinging everywhere. She greeted him, to be sure, and said she was glad to see him, but in a minute or two she got up from her place at his feet and wandered about outside. Suddenly a village clock chimed the quarter. It was the time. His visits came to a close, and she was not with him. She had left him alone, the friend who had come so far for her sake. The thought of her carelessness and ingratitude rushed upon her. Oh, how could she have been so thoughtless, so unkind? She hurried back to the hut to tell him of her sorrow, but the door was open. He had gone. Gone after such a visit. Oh, what could she do to make it up to him? How different were these last visits from the first in which she had made him so welcome. Could she ever ask him to come again? Yes, she knew him, and she did not despair. Not only would she invite him again, but the welcome should be so hearty as to remind him of their first meeting. She set to work bravely. The hut was scoured clean, and the walls were cleaned. She was tired, but she did not mind. It was for the king. And then the flowers. She was surprised to find how easily they came to hand. They had not to be fetched from afar, for they lay thick around the hut in every direction, and only waited gathering. As to the roses, what if the thorns did prick and make her fingers bleed? They were for the king. She would not mind the pain, and he would know when he saw them that she had borne the smart for his sake. Really, when all was ready, the hut looked quite a picture. Very poor, of course, but so cared for, so bright. The flowery path was long and happy as on the first glad day, and she longed so to tell him of her sorrow and her love that it seemed as if the time for his visits would never come. As he crossed the little threshold under the roses, she sank at his feet, and her tears fell among the flowers. How tenderly he raised her and listened as she told him of her sorrow and comforted and forgave her. When she asked him what she could do to make up for her carelessness in the past, he said, "Give me your heart. Love makes up for everything. Love me. Make ready for me in the little ways you know I like. Never mind the trouble and the pain. I have borne pain and trouble for you. And he showed her great wounds which he told her had been caused by his love for her. She listened, she promised. And because she knew herself to be a little coward, she asked him to help her. And so the old times came back. He was made welcome as before. Not that she was always as careful as she might have been. Oh no, she was often thoughtless and lazy. But when she had failed, she was sorry and told the king at once. She knew him so well now and trusted him so fully and was so sure of his love for her that she was not afraid to tell him everything she had done, even the things that were most displeasing to him. Since he was with her last, he was always patient with her. He was never tired of forgiving her as soon as she was sorry. He taught her what he wanted her to know so that gradually, she might grow like him and be made ready for her place in the Golden City. The little maid finds she must help in her own training. I ought to have told you the name of the little maid was Flos. This means a flower. And indeed, she was a little wild flower for many a long day. There was much to be improved in her. She forgot her promises. She was willful and selfish. Really so provoking at times that you and I would have given up on her and told the king that she would never make a princess. Those into whose charge he had given her did say so. Those into his charge he had given her did say so. But the king only smiled. He loved her too much to give up. He did not spoil her, but he made much of every little improvement, praised her when she tried to please him, and when she had displeased him, forgave her as soon as she was sorry. At their first meeting, he had told her that if she wished, he would take her some day to be with him in the Golden City. She was enchanted and went about saying to herself that she was to be a princess and have grand robes and jewels and do just as she liked. She told the king how glad she was and that she wished the time would come quickly. He listened quietly and said, "Dilecta," this was his name for her, "I have told you that if you wish, you shall be with me in my palace, but you must be ready to pay the price." "The price?" she replied sadly. "But I am so poor." "I have paid the price of your place there," he said, "but I cannot do all. Those who really wish to be with me there must get ready." "How, dear king?" "By keeping my laws and learning how to know and love and serve me. This is what the happy ones did during their time of exile. They worked hard, and when I came to take them to their true country, they were ready. You must be trained, Dilecta. if you are to be a princess in my court."
"I shall not mind that," she said happily. "It must be nice to be trained by a king."
"I shall help. But a king does not do all the training of his soldiers and courtiers by himself. He has lieutenants, or those who take his place, his instructors who teach their pupils what they have to learn. I shall give you a prince of my court to be your guardian, to be with you always. He will tell you what I want you to do. He will check you when you are going to do wrong and encourage you when you are in difficulty or in danger. You must call him to your help when you are in need, and you must obey and respect and love him for all his care of you. To make it easy for you to know what I want, you shall have my 10 chief laws or commands written plainly in a book, and I will give you teachers who will speak to you in my name, so that in obeying them you will obey me as if you really heard my voice." The little maid hung down her head and looked sad.
I would rather hear your voice, dear king," she said. "I like to do what you tell me, but I may not like to do what other people want."
"If you really love me, you will want to do as I like. I know what is best for you, and what you must do to make you fit to be with me in the Golden City. You will have to go to school, and the lessons will be hard sometimes. The happy ones in my palace had to do many things they did not like, things that hurt very much, but I helped them always. And because they loved me and trusted me, they did not mind the pain. They tried their best to keep my laws and to do all that I told them, either myself or by their prince, guardian, or the teachers I sent. You too must love and trust me, Dialecta." She did not answer, but laid her hand in his. The King's Laws. I am afraid you will think Dialecta a selfish, silly little thing, and wonder what the king saw in her to love. There was a certain great deal in her that he could not love. He saw that she was willful and changeable, and that she loved him more for the presents he gave her and for those he promised her than for himself. But he saw too something which no one else could see, something beautiful and lovable, that she would become if she would fight against the ugly things he could not love. He loved what she would be one day when her training was finished, and so he had patience with her and put up with her trying ways. The very next day, she saw him. After their last talk, she began,
"Dear king, I do so wish you would take me now, this minute, to the Golden City, and that I might not have to keep laws and do things that hurt. Why must there be laws for people who want to be good?"
It was one of her foolish questions, but the king took the trouble to explain, because this was a matter that concerned the little maid very much. And if you care about her, you must try to understand it as she had to do. If you ask which is the happiest country in the world today, You'll be told it is where there are laws to keep the good people safe and happy and to punish the bad. And if you want to know where the people are most miserable, you will find it is where there is an anarchy or no government, where cruel, selfish men do as they like and rob and kill without anyone being strong enough to prevent or punish them. Laws are not made to tease and trouble people, but to keep them from harm. There were laws even in the king's own country, and it was because the happy ones there kept them perfectly that they were quite happy and had everything they could wish without any trouble or pain. But this perfect peace and joy could not be found even by good people in the land of exile. Melignus, who had been the first to break the king's laws, and whom the king was obliged to punish for his disobedience, did all he could to get those who were traveling toward the golden city to break the laws too, that they might be punished with him. He hated to think that they were on their way to the beautiful home he had lost. So he tried to get them to be disobedient like himself. He could not make them do wrong, but he could advise and coax them. And this is how he did it. In country places where two or more roads met, a signpost is put up to guide the passersby. Wise travelers consult it and carefully follow its directions. They do not look out for the pleasantness, but for the safest and shortest route on the journey. In the land of exiles, signposts bearing the king's commands were set up at the parting of ways that all men might know which road would bring them to their true country. To dissuade them from taking it, Melignus stood at the crossroads to point out the attractions of the broad road and the hardships of the narrow way. By watching the travelers all through their journey, he had come to know them well. He saw that because they all liked what was most easy and comfortable, they were often in danger of leaving the straight road to the golden city. So he tried to persuade them that it was hard to climb a steep hill when there was a flowery path close by. He could not make them choose the easier way. Do remember this, but he could try to prove that to be happy, we must do what costs us less. This is a great mistake. The happy ones who reached the home the king had ready for them got there by trying to do always what the king wanted of them for their good. They would not listen to Melignus, nor to their own likes and dislikes. They gave ear to their dear king and leader, saying to them, "If you love me, keep my commandments, and keep them too for your own sake. I ask you for a little while to go against yourselves sometimes, for your own good. When I get you safely to your true home, I will never ask you to do anything hard anymore." Perhaps you will say or think, yes, when they got to the golden city, they were happy, of course, but they had to be happy all the way there. Far from it. The good people were happy even as they traveled along the hard road. They were even happier than the people on the easy road who were always trying to please themselves and shun labor and pain. The land of exile was a place of trial for all, but the good people did not have to bear more than the bad. Shall I tell you why? All along the hard and narrow road, the good king had placed things to help the travelers, but Melignus didn't care whether the people on the broad road suffered or not. Before the king met the little maid, she was like a wild colt, running about as it likes, doing no work and of no use to anyone. But after he had taken her in hand, she had often to say no to herself. You must remember that the king had offered her a great reward if she would let herself be prepared to be a princess in his court. It was a matter that rested with herself. He would not force her against her will. If she refused to be trained, he would make the offer to someone else with more sense and thankfulness for his kindness. All through her time of training, she could do as she chose, keep the king's laws or not. She had free will. He explained this clearly to Dialecta, but he had often to repeat the same thing. She was so apt to be led by likes or dislikes. It was only by degrees that she began to ask herself,
What would my dear king like? If I do this, shall I be glad or sorry next time I see him?
And then she would do the right thing bravely and not mind the pain, for the joy it would be to see his smile. The king's household. We have seen the king of the Golden City was so good and kind that although he could do whatever he wished and had whatever he could desire, riches, joy, the love of all around him, he was not satisfied to have these good things for himself alone. He wished his subjects to be happy too. They must be happy in the land of exile so far as he could help. They must be happy afterwards with him, and all who had reached the beautiful land with a perfect happiness beyond anything they could desire or even imagine. So he was not content that the exiles should be servants and subjects only. He wished to adopt them and make them his children, most dear children, whilst they were quite tiny. When this was done, a beautiful white robe called Grace was given them, and their names were written in a book called the Book of Life. No one could take the robe from them, or blot their names out of the Book of Life, no one but themselves. If their names were found written there when they reached the gates of the Golden City, they were sure to be let in. The king had a large house in which he stored all his subjects needed on their way to their true country. From the child taking its first tottering steps thither, to the aged pilgrim nearing the end of the journey, all were provided for. There was also the school where the king's children were taught their duty to their royal father and to one another. Maps showed them the right road to the promised land, that they might not lose their way. And they read the history of the land of exile, that they might learn a lesson from the lives of the pilgrims, good and bad, who had gone before them. There was the gymnasium, where they were trained by many exercises how to use the wonderful powers given them, how to fit themselves for active service and defend themselves against the king's enemies and their own. Close by was the armory, where they could see the sword and shield, the helmet and the breastplate, and the strong shoes they would need when they were old enough to be enrolled among the king's soldiers. Further on was the hospital, or infirmary for the wounded and the sick. And, most wonderful of all, there was the banquet hall for young and old, rich and poor alike, and the royal audience chamber where the king was ready to receive at all hours those who came to him for favors, for advice, or for help in their troubles or their needs. Here, too, at certain times he would meet his friends gathered together to entertain him and praise him with music and song, and to cheer themselves with the thought of the happy time when they would leave the land of exile and be with him in Patria, their own dear country and home. A troublesome partner. The people of the land of exile lived a good deal alone. They met together at certain times, but each one lived a large part of his or her life in a little hut, which the owner had to keep swept and tidy. I say they lived alone, but in reality all the men, women and children. Each had a comrade who was always with them from the time they came to the land till the time they went out and forever after. The name of their partner was Self. The two were never separated. They walked, worked, went to sleep, and woke together. But the owner of the hut was, or ought to have been, master or mistress there. Self was the sub or under partner, so it was not what Self liked or disliked that mattered, but what the king wanted and what was good for the owner of the hut. This lesson Self had to learn, and as a rule, it was learned very slowly. A constant struggle for the upper hand went on, therefore, in most of the huts, and in one particularly, as we shall see. Now, if any of you think it would have saved trouble to let Self be the ruler in every hut, that the poor owner might have the chance of a quiet life, I must tell you that you know very little about the matter. Not, mind you, that the hut owners never tried the plan. Some of them did. Either they never fought Self at all, or they gave in after a short tussle. But sooner or later they all found out their mistakes. Once Master Self showed himself, or herself, as the case might be, a cruel tyrant. He made a slave of the hut owner, who should have taught him better and treated him so badly that life was a misery to him. No, the only way to secure any kind of peace was to keep this unruly comrade in his place and put him down firmly when he gave himself airs. But we must go back to one little hut and its inmates.
6 o'clock, time to get up,
said Dilecta, and she was just going to make a spring when Self's sleepy voice was heard. "It can't be time yet, and if it is, the clock's fast or wrong."
"It was right all day yesterday. Come, get up."
"Oh, I am so awfully tired, and I've a headache. At least I had one yesterday, and I don't want to have one tomorrow, or I shan't enjoy the fair."
"If we don't get up, we shan't get our work done. The king comes this morning, and there's the floor to sweep and the flowers to get."
There's plenty of time yet, and 5 minutes can't make any difference. Now Dilecta had been warned again and again by the Prince Guardian not to argue with Self, especially the first thing in the morning. He said there was no lawyer to equal Self at this time. The only thing to do was to spring up at once and not listen to her. Dilecta had been listening all this time, and now she said sleepily,
"Oh, very well, then. Just 5 minutes, and we'll take care to keep awake."
So they turned over, and in less than 1 minute were fast asleep again. The sun was shining brightly into the hut when Dilecta woke with a start.
"Oh, how late it is! It will be too late, and it's all your fault, Self. I told you we should miss the king. And now he will have knocked and had no answer and passed us by."
She spoke of the king, but I fancy she was more vexed with Self than sorry for his majesty. And Self was angry too, for she could not bear blame, especially from Dilecta. It made her feel so uncomfortable. "It was quite as much your fault as mine," she said sharply. "And you ought to know better, for you're always preaching." They wrangled in this way all the time. They were dressing and at breakfast and on the way to school. There everything went wrong, and no wonder, for they were not at peace together and could not leave others in peace. One thing, however, was curious, but it is a fact. Though Dilecta was cross because self had got the better of her in the morning, she showed her ill temper by giving way to self all the rest of the day. And self, instead of being satisfied with this, got more and more discontented and disagreeable as the hours went on. It was late that evening when the Prince Guardian came to Dilecta's hut, saw no light in the little window, which was generally a bright patch in the darkness. There was crying within, and opening the door, he found her sitting on the floor looking hot and angry.
"How is this, Dilecta, all in the dark? Where is your lamp?"
Now the name of the lamp was Peace. It was the king's special gift to his friends, and his directions about it were very important. It was to be kept burning at all costs. No wind or storm was ever to put it out, and it was never to be left near the window, lest Malignus should put his hand and take it away. He was always trying to get hold of it. He had been heard to say that he thought he had done a good day's work if he succeeded in robbing a little child of the lamp. At times, it burned rather low in Dilecta's hut, but it was never out. So you will understand the Prince Guardian's grave look and tone of reproof on finding the little place in darkness.
"How is this?"
he asked again.
Malignus, she sobbed. "It was Malignus. I had it too near the window, and he got it, and it was nearly out before he took it." And she burst out crying again.
"Get up now and tell me about it."
"Oh, Prince, it's been such a bad day. When I woke, it was raining and cold, and the first thing I saw were Self's sleepy eyes looking very sorry for me. Dilecta," she said, "don't get up just yet. You're tired, and Monday's a horrid day. There's nothing to look forward to. Wait a bit." So I waited and waited till I fell asleep again. When I did get up, everything was wrong. We were late for school, and when we were scolded, I said what wasn't true. The lessons were too hard, and all the teachers were unkind, and the children too. I was cross with Self all day, but somehow I let her do just as she wanted, as if I didn't care what I did. When I came home, it was too dark to see anything, and I didn't care to trim my lamp, and it burned lower and lower, and then suddenly I saw a hand come out of the darkness and snatch it away. Oh, my lamp, my lamp. And the king gave it to me and told me to take care of it. And she began sobbing afresh.
The Prince Guardian listened patiently. Then he said,
"I have spoken to you many times today, Dilecta, but you would not listen to me. When I spoke, you turned away, and see what has come of it. But you have owned up now, like a good child, and you have learned a useful lesson. You have found out that when Malignus and Self advise you to do as you like and have your own way in everything, it is not to make you happy as they pretend, but to get what they want themselves.
Self wants to have some pleasure or get rid of some pain or trouble that very minute. It is not you she is thinking about at all. Malignus wants to make you sad and discouraged, and this is the way he sets about it. He tries to make you do wrong and break the king's laws just to please yourself. It's only a little thing, he whispers. It doesn't matter much. Watch now and see what he does next. If you listen to him and do as he advises, he turns upon you directly and says, "Now you've done it. You've broken your resolutions again. You are always breaking them, and you'll never be any better. So it's no use trying, and you may as well give it all up and just enjoy yourself. You're a mean and ungrateful little thing, and the king is tired of you."
Dilecta looked up surprised. I thought it was you, Prince, who tried to make me sorry when I broke my resolutions and made the king sad.
No, my child, I try to make you sorry for having displeased the king. But the prince guardians never discourage the children they have charge of. No matter how often they fall, we always cheer them up and tell them to go on as before. You may fail hundreds of times, but what of that? Your faults are no worse because you see them better. When the ugly measle marks show themselves, you say, "Oh, how frightful." But the doctor is quite pleased and says they are much better outside than inside. They will soon go away now. So to see what is ugly in yourself is a sign of better things coming. The king never discourages you, Dilecta. He is very gentle and patient with you, and he wants you to be patient with yourself. You cannot correct all your faults at once. If you work at this task as long as you are in the land of exile, it is what you were sent here to do. And when the task is done, you will go home to the Golden City for the holidays.
"Oh, look! Look!" cried Dilecta joyfully. My lamp has come back. While you were talking and telling me to cheer up, I saw it put in its place again, and it's getting brighter and brighter. Even Self is pleased to see it come again. See, she's smiling at it. I'm sorry, dear Prince, for being so bad today, and I'll never listen to Self anymore. I really won't. And it's true what Malignus says, that I'm a mean, ungrateful little thing, and the king's tired of me. I won't be mean anymore. At least I'll try not.
Do not trust your own strength, Dilecta, for you are very weak. But the king loves you and will send you help whenever you ask him. The king's table. You might be sure that so generous a king and so kind a father would see that his subjects and his children were provided with all things necessary for them. But this is not saying enough. In a royal household, we expect everything to be on a grand and imposing scale. We look for not merely a safe shelter from storms and sufficient and suitable clothing for protections in all weathers, and rest and recreation after the labors of the day, but for these things in abundance. Above all, we look for a well-spread table, that none may go away hungry or disappointed, for food excellent in quality and unstinted in quantity, that all may grow up well and strong. But would anyone expect a banquet every morning? Surely not. Even in royal nurseries this is not provided. Yet the good king did not think this was too much to prepare for the little guests at his tables. He invited them, rich and poor, every day. And it was always a royal banquet that was made ready. More than this, he himself set before the guests the costly food he provided. Now, there were some folks who, thinking themselves wiser than the king, blamed him for this, saying that it was overmuch generosity and waste, and he made himself too cheap and would be treated with disrespect. Children of 7 were too young to understand who he was and what he was giving them. They would not value the daily banquet which had cost him so much to prepare. They would not thank him. Nay, some, they say, would stay away because it was too much trouble to get up and make themselves fit to sit at his table. But the king paid no attention to their wiseacres. He wanted the children around him. He knew that when he had made ready for them, he knew that what he had made ready for them would make them strong and good and happy. He loved them and hoped that the thought of his love would make them love him in return. So they were always welcome. And it was a beautiful sight to see him in the midst of the little white-robed throng. One thing only he strictly required of all: the white robe. No one might come to his table without it, under pain of incurring his displeasure and dreadful punishment. A man had once dared to do so. He was driven out of the banquet hall, was never seen again. Near the hall was an antechamber where a white robe might be had by all who applied for it properly. Small stains on the robe did not prevent people from sitting down at the table. Still, the purer it was, the more welcome was the wearer, and the richer were the jewels with which the king was set to adorn it. So the guests were advised to remove all spots as far as possible. The king used to go amongst his guests with the presents he had for each. Those got the most and the best, who had taken most trouble to get ready and who were most earnest in asking. If we ask for many things on our birthday, people think us greedy. The king never thought his visitors greedy. It was nothing that he was more pleased to give. It was noticed that he was more pleased to give his good things than they were to get them. If ever he looked displeased or disappointed, it was when he was asked for nothing.